Welcome to this week's episode of Purrfect Takes. I'm your host, Stephen Patton, joined, as always, by my co-host and dear friend, Jake LaQuire. We have a lot to get into today. Where do you think we should start?
Start with the beer of the week. Obviously, I'm still drinking water. A little bit of like the sparkling ice water juice today. It's pretty good, and it has all the. It says it has vitamins and minerals and stuff in it. I just think it tastes good, So I'm gonna drink that instead of regular water.
Very nice. And like last week, we have Spaceman Spliff from Sycamore Brewing. Check them out here locally in Charlotte. And speaking about Charlotte, there's been a lot more news recently with the Carolina Panthers as some of these practices and OTAs are kicking off, and guys are either at practice or missing at practice. And tonight, Blueprint comes out at 7 p.m. So good little like hype series for Panthers fans trying to find reasons of hope after a 2-15 season.
Yeah, they always do a good job too. I think they were nominated for an Emmy a couple times with it, like in the sports media space. So it's always good to see. I can't believe we left this off the notes, but yesterday was announced that or Tepper Sports Entertainment proposed a rather large, not donation, requesting of funds to renovate the stadium. It's going to be going from 2025 to 2029, I believe, if it gets passed. And no roof still, but I'm okay with that. Like, I like seeing the skyline when we watch because a lot of the stadiums in the NFL, they're like outside the city. You look at the Patriots, Foxborough. I don't know if you've been there. Foxborough's half an hour outside of Boston. Or like
Yep.
the Cardinals is in Glendale, not in Phoenix, or Dallas, or the Dallas Cowboys are in Arlington, Texas. So it's cool to see that we have a stadium right in the middle of our city. And depending on which direction you're facing, you can look out and see the buildings behind it. That's really cool. Glad they're keeping it open aired. And I'm also kind of old school. I think football should be played out in the open. Like
Yeah.
rain's part of the game, Like you just got to deal with it. The only negative part is, and I saw a lot of people on Twitter talking about it, is it gets real hot in the early months there at Bank of America Stadium. So getting like a transparent roof wouldn't be the worst thing, but it's going to be interesting because all the renovations I think are needed. Right, our stadium's been there for going on 35 years now,
Yeah.
maybe a little over
No,
30.
30.
And
Yeah.
yeah, it was started in 96. 96 was the first year in the stadium. Um, so I do think renovations are overdue, but it's going to be interesting. And with those renovations, they're also talking about adding a practice facility. We heard or we saw really how the last one went in Rock Hill, but with this one being almost right next to the stadium, if the city signs off on the zoning, I think it'll get done pretty quickly because Adam Thielen yesterday came out and said, "Hey, we have some of the worst facilities in the league in terms of practice facilities." So I think there is a an urgency to get that finished, but we'll have to see.
Yeah, no, we will. Some of the renovations are intriguing. They'll have some cool, more technological advances for the outside of the stadium, or at least that's what they presented to the city of Charlotte. The other aspect is it's almost like they cut a chunk of seats out to make
Yeah.
like a little social area to where you can see exactly like what you were talking about, that Charlotte skyline, and really enjoy some good fall football this year. Well, not this year, but in the coming years. But what that does is it cuts down on the seating, which we host an MLS team there, as well as the Carolina Panthers. And so, with that cutting down on seating and trying to be more of a almost activity for people to have while at the game and be able to socialize and have a great view, both watching the game and watching the city. I think that is a initiative to understand that we as a football team and a soccer team suck, and so instead of having a stadium with 70,000 available seats, maybe they cut that down a little bit and they're able to fill the stadium more frequently. That would be my guess as to why that was in the plan.
I think it's going to be like if you know the Cowboys Stadium, they have like it's called a standing area, and
Yep.
so you see those videos of when the doors open on Sunday, all the fans rushing in, and you're like, they paid for their ticket, right? Why are they running in? It's to get to that standing area and get a spot. I think that's going to be what it's like, at the Panthers' new stadium. But you do bring up a good point. If the Panthers and Charlotte FC aren't playing well, then they can turn around and look at the city and have a couple drinks and stuff. So I think it's going to be interesting. If it comes to fruition, like we said, 2025 through 2029 is when it should get done. Like, should these things sometimes tend to go over the announced date, but that's super interesting. We are ramping up the offseason stuff. Dave Canales, you said you had a couple of notes on his pressers this past week and today. I like his style of speaking a bit more than some of our previous coaches. He has a lot more energy, but with that, he likes to ramble on a little bit with answers and stuff like that. But he seems really energetic and excited to be there. Like that's kind of the notes I have from him. But I think you went a little more in detail of what you saw and heard from him the past couple weeks.
To go off your point about just Dave Canales as a communicator, it does feel like he can ramble, but I think what he does really well, and it goes in line with kind of the new generation of not only players, but just the modern era that we live in, that a lot of people want the why for what you're doing.
Mhm.
And so a lot of old school heads, it's like you do this because we told you to, and not explaining like the intricacies and the layers behind it. And so having a communicator that can do that is phenomenal. So I appreciate that from him. I liked what he talked about when I'm looking here at my notes. That he talked about how the offense is very friendly for tackles, and we saw Tristan Wirfs and Luke Kadecki do really well last year. The prior year in Seattle, we saw what Charles Cross and Abraham Lucas did in Seattle as rookies, and so the more support that we can give Icky and Taylor Moton, especially with the investment that we've made in the interior offensive line, my hope is that Icky will take a step, Taylor Moton will return to like all pro form, and we're really going to get a lot of production out of those guys. He talked a lot about situation ball and why I don't know if that was really an issue with Frank Reich and some of the things he did. I'm sure they worked on some of that. That was an issue with the Matt Rule era. Is
Oh
Teddy
yeah.
Bridgewater brought up some of those comments of like, we didn't practice some of these situations. And Canales is smart going, hey, we're going to be in an in game scenario. What is our plan? Have we practiced it? Do guys know what they're supposed to be doing? And that attention to detail is extremely important. So I've appreciated that. One other thing he said, kind of why they're in a period right now where it's just practice with no pads, is the focus on the technique. You aren't hitting guys necessarily full speed and whatnot, but if you can make sure that you are going through the right motions right now, then when everything does cranked up to where it is full contact, guys are prepared and they're actually kind of taking everything to the next level as a unit, as a group with communication, and you're seeing what gels, what doesn't, and you're able to correct that before the season even starts. So a lot of great things, but again, it's the off season. You always hear great things. It's during the season that things either tend to unravel or come to fruition. The things today, big talk on like communication. Some guys obviously are missing. It's a voluntary training camp right now, so it's not like this big to do that you have to be there. But guys like Jadeveon Clowney or DJ Wanham, they aren't there. DJ Wanham's kind of coming off an injury. Clowney has been known to not even show up until kind of like July, August, when things are ramping up before the preseason. So again, coaches aren't really worried about it. They're staying in contact with these players, keeping everybody up to speed, and hoping that they can get everybody together soon so everybody's on the same page.
Another missing person, and he's been missing all offseason, Eddie Pinero, the kicker from last year, even played a little bit before that. We brought in an undrafted free agent kicker to compete with him this summer, this offseason. But from all the stuff from the reporters, particularly Joe Person, who says he's been lights out from field goals, 5 for 5 every time they see him, even from distance. I don't know if it's going to be so much of a competition if Pinero isn't here. And like you said, voluntary. You don't have to be here for sure. But with a new coaching staff, I'm sure it's about making impressions. And I think the undrafted kicker, I believe Harrison Mevis, has made a pretty strong one. So I think that's going to be an interesting battle that we get to see in training camp and maybe in the preseason. But I like a lot of what you said. Canales for sure is a good communicator. I think that's something we missed last year with all the different voices in the brain trust trying to communicate different offensive ideologies to Bryce and the rest of the offense. Hopefully, now that it's streamlined, it should be much more efficient this year. You brought up Icky and Moton. I think that's a good segue into like later because we're going to be talking about O line. But right now, there's a lot of a lot of wide receiver news around the NFL. And before we touch on our around the NFL subject, do you kind of wanted to continue the stir that you were talking about last week with Jonathan Mingo versus Xavier Legette? So I'll let you kick that off.
Well, last week, and we didn't touch too much on it. Obviously, I think Mingo and Leggett were brought up by name, but a lot of it was expectations for Bryce. And obviously, we aren't looking to win the NFC South. I don't think that should be the expectation for Bryce. You want to just see him take a step as a player and start executing as an NFL quarterback. Well, this week, what I want to touch on, and it was kind of in the same vein, a lot of this popped off last week, but this idea that we draft a wide receiver, which was the smart thing to do. We had one of the worst wide receiver rooms, but we draft a guy that struggles to win, have success on routes downfield, and he played the X position we saw last year at South Carolina, struggled to run routes, create separation, has a little bit more of a project tag to him on his name. Like that's just kind of the reality with a guy like Legette. He wasn't polished like a Lad McConkey or one of these guys where he can route you up. He understands some of these layers and intricacies that come with it. And he wasn't able to necessarily get open. And so that's one thing you like about your wide receiver prospects. You saw a lot of that in Mingo's game the year before. And what I thought was interesting is looking at kind of the breakdowns is that Mingo's had a full off season. He already has rapport with Bryce Young. I could see him taking a step because he was that project wide receiver. And I'm not saying he's going to be an all pro. I'm not saying he's going to be a pro bowler. But we could see a lot of production from Mingo this year where Legette is still kind of getting his footing and getting up the speed. And we're already seeing early on in some of these voluntary workouts Legette's dealing with a hamstring injury. So he's going too hard. He's not pacing himself. And if he's not made available, he could become like DJ Chark was last year, show a few flashes, but struggle because he's struggling to stay on the field.
Yeah, I got you there. I think a lot of people are in the whole Mingo versus Legette debate, and it's not just you. It's like all of Panthers Twitter since even before the draft, because we have a lot of South Carolina fans. It's been like, oh, they're the same type of player. It's like they both can't see the field, this kind of thing. I think with Legette, and we need to temper or tepper your expectations, pun intended, because he is a rookie. He was the 32nd pick. I don't think he's going to be an all pro or anything, like you said, pro bowler. And with Mingo being in not the system, but like on the Panthers, because we switched offensive coaches and everything, and having somewhat of a connection with Bryce, they connected only a few times last year, but still a couple times. I think he could come out the gate and be a little better than Legette is to start the year. What I will say, however, is I think Legette's explosiveness downfield, I think he's a much better at the catch point receiver.
Yeah.
And I think that they're the willing investment that the team made to trade into the first round. And we say it's for the fifth round option in his contract. I'm not really buying that because, like I said, if he's good enough, you're going to extend him beforehand. I think showing that kind of investment means that they want him to see the field early and often. And so I wouldn't be surprised if he outproduces Mingo, especially if Mingo doesn't improve from what he was last year. But I do think, hopefully, that we're able to see both of them on the field at the same time. Ideally, you want Mingo operating like as a power slot, as his final
Yep.
form or something like that. Adam Thielen's not getting any younger. I think I just heard some thunderclouds, but Adam Thielen's not getting any younger. Hopefully, you want to see him on the field not as often as he was last year. I believe he was top 5 in snaps for our offensive players last year. So hopefully, we're able to see growth from Mingo and Legette as he's entering his first NFL season. Like you said, I think he is going a bit too hard. He's practicing here, and then we see him post on Instagram with I think it's the Route God. I'm not sure
Yep.
his actual handle, but like he's working there too. So he's obviously putting in 2-a-days and stuff in the middle of May, June, July heat. Probably not the best idea. So hopefully he reins it back in a little bit because they aren't going to Spartanburg this year, which is good for us as fans and for them too. But once training camp hits, it's going to be swampy. It's going to be hot. So hopefully he's able to get used to that. But as a
I mean,
whole, I'm
he
just
he played at South
at
Carolina,
South
so I mean,
Carolina. Yeah,
he's used to kind of this level of humidity. My biggest thing is to go the wrap this up is I think both Leggett and Mingo were project guys coming out of college. I think Leggett is going to struggle against separation. He does the best against zone coverages, and so what you hope is you trade for Deontay Johnson, who is your de facto wide receiver one at this point when you look at the depth chart.
yeah.
If he's getting a lot of the targets and he has a lot of success against man, he didn't see necessarily a lot of man last year when he was in Pittsburgh because you don't want to play man against George Pickens and Deontay Johnson. You have a guy that can moss you and a guy that's going to route you up. So they saw a lot more zone coverage. So you're hoping that your first read is going to dictate what the defense then ends up doing to stop that number one option, which then allows Leggett to kind of come underneath or do different things in zone coverages. And if he gets the ball in open space, that's where he's most effective. And you're hoping you get the same thing out of Mingo this year if he starts playing more into Adam Thielen's role, which is that kind of power slot role. So why I think both of them share a lot of attributes together, if you're looking at raw scores, if you're looking at route success, I think it goes back to the fact that Legette is, yes, an X wide receiver, and Mingo in his best role is going to be a slot. You look at his highlights, you even look at his tape at Ole Miss. When he had success, he was coming out of the backfield, he was coming out of the slot. He had mismatches and he was able to maximize those in the pass game. So you're just hoping that's kind of the thought process and philosophy the team has going into this season.
I'm with you there. I certainly don't want to compare Leggett to Pickens because I was a bit higher on Pickens coming out of the draft in his class. But I think
1,000%.
yeah. I think Leggett actually at the catch point has a little bit of Pickens in him. I think he can moss people at that point, just with his vertical leaping ability. His hands, Legett's hands are small, but surprisingly, he like goes up and gets it and pulls it down. So I think he has that in him. Hopefully it works out. But I think this is a good transition into around the NFL because this past week we saw, in fact, it was right after we recorded on Tuesday. We started last Tuesday. We saw it start to happen. It always does. But we saw some wide receivers get paid. And the first one we saw was Nico Collins, the Houston Texan. He had 1,400 yards last year. I didn't know. I knew he had a good year. I didn't know it was that good, but really
Yep.
good year. He's getting $72.75 million over 3 years. I think he probably underbid on himself a little bit. I think he could have gotten a lot more maybe in the following season, but he's getting that extension early, like Devontae Smith did with the Eagles. And I think that's a really good deal for the Texans because Stephon Diggs' contract is essentially a 1 year, has like 5 void years tacked to the end. Tank Dell, rookie last year, you're going to have him for a couple more years. So I think you're nailed in with Nico Collins as your one, and then the next couple guys is 2 and 3 for the next couple of years. But I think that's a really, really good deal for the Texans, especially taking advantage of CJ Stroud and Will Anderson's rookie deals.
Yeah, and I know you're talking about Nico Collins kind of not betting on himself, but the issue is he was a late round pick to begin with, didn't really kind of hit that boom year like you're saying, going over 1,400 yards. He doesn't have a lot of accolades like All Pro first team, and so trying to get a deal any higher than what he did is a lot harder to do. And so if there were
That's true.
any regression this next year, he wouldn't be able to negotiate. So I think it was a great deal for him, like you said, kind of in line with that Devontae Smith contract. And we saw another Bama product, speaking about Devontae Smith, Jalen Waddle get paid in Miami. And you were high on him coming out of the draft. I think it was either his no, I don't think it was his rookie year because he set the receptions record. But I think the next year he was dealing with some injuries, was out
Mm-hmm.
for a few games this past year. But he seems to be healthy now. And you never know if Tyreek Hill, it's just going to eventually kind of fall off that speed or the agility or an injury happens. And Waddle, I think, is very much primed to take over that wide receiver one role down in Miami.
Yeah, he would be receiver one on a ton of teams. The Panthers, for one. Actually, probably every team in our division. Maybe not Mike Evans, because Mike Evans
The
is still
Saints, Chris
trucking.
Olave. I wouldn't put him over Chris Olave, but that's just me
I think
personally.
I think going forward, I would rather have Olave, but right now Waddle's much better in my opinion. The reason I had him off of last week was I anticipated a big payday like this, and he got paid. But no, he deserves every penny of it. That receiving core at Bama, it was Judy, Ruggs, Devontae Smith, and Waddle. When I was looking at it when they were all going into the draft, Waddle was like an amalgam of the other three. Like he has Judy's route running ability, he has the speed of Ruggs, he can win at the catch point like Devontae Smith, has his toughness too. You talked about dealing with injury. He dealt with injury all last year and would come out of games and then go back in and play the rest of the game. That happened like 5 or 6 times. As a Jalen Waddle fantasy holder, I know that. But super tough. I think the sky's the limit for him, especially if Tyreek Hill starts to slow down, like you said. But the crown jewel of the receiver extensions came yesterday, right?
Market
Yeah,
setter.
yeah,
Market
and it
setter.
was like 9 a.m. yesterday. Justin Jefferson, the best receiver in the league. We said he'd be the highest paid non-quarterback, and or we thought maybe Nick Bosa might still be paid more. Nope. It is Justin Jefferson on his extension. Obviously, you got to take the 5th year into account, but the extension itself is 140 over 4. That's 35 a year with 110 in guarantees, over 100 million in guarantees. Huge, but I think he deserves it. And I think this is going to impact a couple of the other guys, like we named last week: CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, Brandon Ayuk. Obviously, this is going to be super impactful for them because it's Jefferson at 35, then AJ Brown at 32 with his new deal. So I don't know what's going to happen there, but I think Jefferson absolutely deserves it. And we talk about taking advantage of the rookie QB surplus. Well, JJ McCarthy, the new quarterback there, and now they get to pay the best receiver in the league the most money of a non-quarterback in the league.
Yeah, no, they are betting on the supporting cast why they have a rookie quarterback who they hope is the future. And we've seen a lot of teams over the past decade being able to go to a Super Bowl because they have that quarterback on a rookie contract. So who knows? Maybe the Vikings are sneaky Super Bowl contenders over the next couple of years. Wouldn't definitely count them out because, like what we talked about, Justin Jefferson is probably the most valuable non-quarterback right now in the league.
Well, and I also saw a stat the other day, and it was over the last 5 years. Uh, no, excuse me, it was the last 10 years, I believe. There are 5 teams that have won 7 or more games, and the Vikings were one of them. Like
Yeah,
they've been even their lows are 7 games over the last I believe it was 10 years. So pretty consistent. Like even this year when they had to get a rookie QB, they started at pick 11,
yep.
obviously, but when they had to get a rookie QB, they trade up to 10, and they're able to get one, a top 4 QB in the class. I thought at that spot. So hopefully it all works out for them. And another thing too, I think about this is just or not Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, who we talked about last week, is also on a rookie deal. So I think they're hitting the surplus across the board, considering they have Jefferson and Hawkinson they have to pay, and I'm sure Darisaw will be paid. Their left tackle coming up soon. So I think they're going all not all in, but I think they're doing all the right things in Minnesota. Big props to their general manager. I think he's one of the best in the business.
Yeah, no, he understood they were going to have to lean out and then make sure they had room to keep the guys that they needed to keep. And so Kirk Cousins, he's coming off an Achilles tear. He's 36 years old. They're like, we got to go a younger, cheaper option if we're going to retain guys like Justin Jefferson and some of these other stars because they still have to pay some of, I believe, their offensive linemen. Like you said, Jordan Addison is currently on a rookie contract, but he'll eventually have to get paid. And at that point, Hawkinson will be off the books and some of these numbers will look a lot different. But because of this record setting deal at $35 million, pretty much AAV, and we talked about this, I think, a little bit last week when we talked about kind of the best skill position players. And when we have talked about wide receivers this offseason, is that if he hit that plateau, that meant that guys like CD, Ayuk, Jamar Chase, they were going to get 30 plus million easily. And when you look at AJ Brown's extension being at 32 and you see that 35 mark, it's like, okay, then that probably means CD Lamb, especially being represented by CAA Sports, the same people that negotiated Nick Bosa and Brian Burns' contract, that he's going to probably push around 33, maybe 32 million. I think he has a little bit more claim to be a better wide receiver moving forward than AJ Brown. But that's just my personal opinion. And then Ayuk, I mean, we've heard reports that he's already been asking for this, and it's in line with what the market is now, that he's going to get probably around 32 million, which then begs the question, because here's the interesting slap in the face for Ayuk, is Christian McCaffrey, who already had 2 years left on his deal, and he's 27 right now. So he would have been 29 when both of those 2 years were done. You don't typically pay running backs when they get to their 30s. They extended him past those 2 years that he's currently on to a 32 over 2. Now, we don't know the full extent of the guarantees. We don't know how much of that is fake money that just make him happy. But you're extending a guy that has an injury prone history to age 31, and you haven't prioritized your young rising star that you drafted in the first round. That's a mistake, in my opinion.
Yeah, and you actually made a mistake there. It's not 32 over 2, it's 38 over 2.
38 over 2.
He's
It
making
was the 32
after
million with the wide
yeah,
receivers.
after the extension, he'll be making 19 million a year at age 29, 30, and then 30 to 31. That is huge for a
And
running
top of the
back.
running back market, it's
He
like
he
15,
was
16
he
mil.
was already the number one running back. He signed I believe it was 64 over 4 with Carolina, traded him, so he's making 16 a year. Next was Kamara at 15. On top of that, now because you said there were 2 years left, he's going to be making 19 a year at that point. Will he be healthy at that point? Will he still be Christian McCaffrey at that point? Because regardless of health, right? We see guys like Mostert. We've seen Jeff Wilson Jr. We've seen a lot of guys in the San Francisco, not pipeline, but in the system have success. A lot of running backs there have success. So at age 30, is Christian McCaffrey going to be that much better than the next possible option that you got to pay him 19 million? I don't think the answer would be yes. And I think you're going to be hard pressed to find a trade partner for him, because I thought 16 mil for us would be like, I thought what we got for McCaffrey was good. It was 2, 3, 4, 5. I didn't think we'd get that much. What are you going to get 4 years later when he's making 19 million if you have to trade him?
No,
Like
that's that
a
you incur
seventh?
dead cap.
Yeah.
And this past year they drafted Isaac Rondo out of Louisville, and he had that outside zone like in his
Hmm.
tool bag. And you could have let him over the next 2 years learn from one of the best in the game, and then rode out with a rookie running back on a like rookie contract. Like what are we doing? Like again, I don't know
Well,
what John Lynch is doing, but it's backwards in my
well,
opinion.
now he can learn for the next 4 years, and then when McCaffrey's time is up, they can extend Garendo. You see,
There you
you,
go.
you got to see the whole process, you know. But I'm not sure about that one. The only other news we had was mandatory minicap started today for 10 teams. Like Texans were a team, the Cowboys were a team, and with the Justin Jefferson news coming in the pipeline yesterday, CD Lamb is holding out, reportedly holding out day one of mandatory minicamp, looking for that new deal. I can't imagine it'll be too much longer before they pay him, but this is Dallas we're talking about, and they don't often do the right thing when it comes to paying their stars. So we'll have to see there.
They try to drag it out so much, and then that's how you had the first act contract, and then the Amari Cooper contract, which then they had to go and trade, and it's like you should get ahead of the ball game. Like they try to copy Philly's game plan by signing all these analytics people and some of the brightest minds in the game, but then it's like you aren't doing the smart thing and doing what the Eagles do, and that's extend guys early. That and CD Lamb and Micah Parsons are stars. Like there isn't a question about it. This isn't a fringe guy. I can understand if it's a guy that you're he might hit, but we're gonna wait and see what actually happens. No, these guys are bona fide, like all pro, Pro Bowl level guys that are just the best at their craft. So it is head scratching. Hopefully the Cowboys kind of pull their head out of their ass and they figure things out. But segueing from kind of all this wide receiver talk that we've been doing the past 2 weeks, like you talked about earlier when we brought up Ike Ekwonu and Taylor Moton, and this being a friendly offense for offensive tackles, what we wanted to talk about this week, and I was wrong at the end of last week. I jumped straight to the defensive side and forgot really the hog mollies that matter sometimes on the offensive side. And we're going to talk about offensive line units. And we have a lot of the same offensive line units in the top 10. They're kind of all over the place. It gets a little crazier after we get past the top five, very similar to last week. But again, these are personal opinions of what we have in the state of the NFL offensive lines right now going into the offseason.
Yeah, for sure. I just looked. We have 7 of the same 10. So great minds, they say. But for number one, for both of us, both our number one and two are the same. I think most football fans would agree with the one and two here, even if you have them flip flopped. But number one, both of us have the Detroit Lions. Just going from left to right: Taylor Decker, left tackle; Graham Glasgow, Frank Ragnow. They signed Kevin Zeitler from Baltimore to play right guard, and then Penei Sewell. So across the board, this is kind of jumping the gun, like to my perfect take. I think they have the best tackle duo in the league. Sewell is an all pro. Taylor Decker is right up there. Frank Ragnow, whom they drafted in the first round like 5 or 6 years ago now, really good center, and their guard play is excellent. You mold all this with what Ben Johnson's able to do, and their offensive line is just a bunch of maulers up front in the run game, and they're able to get out in space in the pass game, and they're actually weapons in the pass game if you let the refs do their jobs correctly.
Yeah, no, the Lions are one of the best offensive line units. There's a reason why Ben Johnson stayed in town. He can do a lot of things when you have those kind of hog mollies up front, and there's a lot to love there. I wouldn't say Taylor Decker and Penei Sewell, in my opinion, are the best offensive tackle duo, but they are one of the best for sure. And it is without a doubt that is the engine that drives that offense. They don't have Jamison Williams is kind of developing right now. We saw Sam Laporta come onto the scene. Jamar Gibbs looked great. David Montgomery was solid last year. But outside of Amon Ra, I don't think they have a true like wide receiver out there that's just taking over games like we see with the 49ers, where you could have Brandon Ayuk or Debo Samuel, or the Eagles, where it's AJ Brown or Devontae Smith. And so for them to be able to really be competitive in the NFC, be arguably like a top three team in the NFC, is just a testament to those guys up front that kind of dictate what they're able to do, whether they're running the ball or they're throwing the ball. And Jared Goff is a good enough quarterback to where if he's in a system where he's getting protected, he's going to be able to deliver passes downfield and keep making plays that are extending drives.
Absolutely. Like a lot of those reasons and what I was talking about. That's why both of us, I think, have him number one. And you got to remember this exercise is for the next 2 years going forward. That was the criteria that we put on ourselves, looking at contracts, looking at age, all that kind of stuff. And I think that might be the reason that both of us have the Eagles at number two, because if this was just this year, maybe I'd have the Eagles at number one. But it's not. It's the next 2 years. And looking at that, the Eagles have Lane Johnson, who's getting up there in age, the star right
Yeah.
tackle, one of the best in the game. Just left to right, Jordan Mailata for the Eagles, left tackle, Landon Dickerson, who just got a huge payday this offseason. I think he's the number one guard now. Cam Jurgens, they drafted a couple years ago out of I don't think it's Nebraska. It was Wisconsin. It was one of the red Big Ten schools. Tyler Steen from Alabama. He's their right guard. And Lane Johnson. They also signed Mekhi Becton in the offseason to be like a depth swing tackle. And I think if anybody can kind of resurrect his career, it's Jeff Stoutland, the Eagles O line coach. But I think if it were just this year, maybe I'd have the Eagles at number one, because I think that unit is incredibly stout. But next 2 years, I think Lane Johnson is going to take a step or two back, because this is going to be his. He was drafted in 13, so this is going to be his 11th season, I think, coming up. So getting a little bit up there, but still really, really good. And I think I believe Mailata just got extended as well. I think
Yep.
this is another really strong tackle duo, both in the NFC so far.
Yeah, I know you're a little hesitant on Lane Johnson's age. I mean, this guy's 34 years old, but the big thing is with offensive tackles, they're very much like quarterbacks where their careers are some of the longer ones. If you're especially like one of the bigger stars, we saw it with Andrew Whitworth, who played into his
Yeah.
40s. Like he didn't even get to the Rams until he was 36 years old. And that's the next 2 years for Lane Johnson. And what we've seen Lane Johnson do, like he is arguably the best right tackle in the game right now until proven otherwise. And I know Penny Sewell is coming for that crown, and Tristan Wirfs was right there a couple of years ago before moving to the left tackle. But then you look at Jordan Mailata and you see just kind of like who he is and how they've developed him as a seventh round pick back in 2018. You have Landon Dickerson, hopefully, and this is the big question mark. Is Cam Jurgens going to be good enough to replace the production that you had with a Hall of Famer? And that is exactly what Jason Kelsey was for the Eagles. He was a Hall of Famer. He was a pivotal point in that QB kind of like push, or the tush push.
The tush
That's
push.
the word for it. Yeah. So so with that all being said, if Cam Jurgens can come in and produce like 75% of what you got with Jason Kelsey, I think this offensive line is one of the best. If he isn't able to produce like that, I think we're going to see a little bit of regression just because of how effective that Kelsey brother was on that Eagles offense. Like, I mean, he moved people. He could get up to the second level, especially on different run plays. And so that's the biggest question mark for me. We both have the Lions and Eagles 1-2 on our list. It's at 3 that we have a little disparity. Your number 3 team is my number 5 team, and my number 3 team's your number 4. But I'll let you take this stage of why you think the team at 3 deserves to be there.
Yeah, so like you said, a little bit of a change up from this point on. I have the Cleveland Browns at number three, just reading it left to right. Jedrick Wills, left tackle, Joel Batonio, still playing there. He's like Lane Johnson. He's been there, I think, since 2014. So he's up there in age as well. Ethan Pochitz, center. Wyatt Teller, he was center guard from Buffalo. And Jack Conklin, who they got from Tennessee a couple years ago. They also had Dawan Jones, the like
Mm-hmm.
massive Ohio State tackle. He played quite a few snaps in games last year, and they drafted Zach Zinner from Michigan this year. The reason I am this high on the Browns as opposed to other teams like I won't spoil your team yet, but I'm looking at the offensive line as a unit, and I love those five starters. But I also like Dawan Jones. He played a lot of good snaps last year. He was doing a good job against. I can't quite remember the team. I think it was the Ravens game where he was just dominating that game. Has to go against Myles Garrett in practice every day. So as a unit, I think depth wise, the Browns are going to be number three for me. Like some other teams, I might be concerned if they lose a starter, like the Eagles. Like if they lose Lane Johnson, I might get murky. If the Lions end up losing one of their guards or Taylor Decker, it might get murky. But with the Browns, I think they can. I don't want to say they can afford to lose a guy because you never want to lose a starting O lineman. We saw the Panthers last year with that, when that happens. But I think if one of their starters goes down, they have consummate O line depth, and that's not something a lot of teams can say. And for me, that is the reason that they are number 3 on my list.
Yeah, and I think very highly of this group. I have them at number 5 for a reason. And like you said, I love the depth. My biggest thing is they got down to third and fourth string offensive tackles last year. This is an injury prone group, and you wonder if everybody's going to stay healthy, because if everybody doesn't stay healthy, this is a bunch of what ifs. And so we talk about,
Mhm.
okay, what if Lane Johnson goes down? And you're absolutely right. I am more worried about the Eagles offensive line if a guy like Lane Johnson goes down than if a guy like Cedric Wills goes down, their left tackle. And I'm not wishing any ill will or anything, but it's like you said, they have DeJuan Jones and they have a couple other guys on that roster where it's like, okay, I feel comfortable about that guy stepping into that role. So love the depth there. That's the reason why I have the Browns as high as I do. The team that I have a little bit above them, I think there's some pieces on there, and they're a lot younger. They have gelled together. They worked really well in Shane Steichen's offense. They did really well in Frank Reich's offense for a while, up until 2 years ago. But you have Bernard Raymond as your left tackle. You have Quentin Nelson, who is a Hall of Fame guard. He's kind of in that Zach Martin tier, so to speak. In my opinion, I mean, this
Yeah,
guy came out as a
not
generational
yet, not
prospect.
yet, but
Yeah,
he'll get there, but not yet. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. And if his career ended the day, obviously he's not a Hall of Famer. He's just on that trajectory where it's like, this is a guy that you build a offensive line around. You have Ryan Kelly as the center, Braden Smith as the right tackle, isn't too shabby. It's the right side of their line that has me a little questionable, because their right guard is Will Fries, a 7th-round pick from a couple years ago. But I like the fact that they drafted Tanner Bortonelli last year. I thought that was not last year, this past year, and a couple other guys. And it feels like, especially with how Shane Steichen does a lot of things with putting a defender in conflict, whether it be a read option or run pass option, I feel like what he's going to be able to do to manipulate that offensive line to put them in some really good scenarios is going to happen this year. And so I'm excited to see what the Colts do. I think exactly like what we talked about with the Lions, their offensive line kind of being the tone setter. I think that's the same case with the Colts. They have some electric playmakers on the outside, and because of what they're able to do in the front 5, they're going to be able to do whatever they want with Anthony Richardson in year 2.
Yeah, I really like the Colts O line as well. They're number 4 for me, so just under the Browns. Like you said, Bernard Raymond has really come into his own since being drafted in 22. I thought his first maybe 10 to 12 games that year were really tenuous. I didn't think he was used to the NFL speed yet, but like the back half of that year and then into his second year, he just flipped a switch. I think he's gotten a lot better. I think he's like an established left tackle now. Talk about Quentin Nelson. He was a top 10 pick for a reason. People were criticizing that. It was him and Mike McGlinchey, I believe, in that class, both Notre Dame. And people were like, oh, a guard that high? Yes, a guard that high if he's this good. Like you said, I think early in his career, we gave him a lot more flowers. Just I think the draft status had a lot to do with it, but also he was mauling dudes. Like he was destroying dudes, tearing them up. And I think he took a step back in 22, but I think he did bounce back last year. Ryan Kelly's
Well,
been there for
okay.
quite a while.
Before we move on from Quentin Nelson, because I want to list this off, he was drafted in 2018. Now, the guy that was drafted directly after him, I think the Colts wish they had, especially with some of the Andrew Luck injury. But Baker Mayfield goes 1, Saquon goes 2nd, Sam Darnold goes 3rd, Denzel Ward goes 4th, and Bradley Chubb goes 5th. Ward, I think, is up there, but who else out of those 5 guys taken above him would you want? And then you had a guy like Roquan Smith, like you said, Mike McGlinchey went after him, Josh Rosen. Like some of these guys, like I don't know if I would take them in a redraft over Quentin Nelson.
No, and I'm with you, right? It's just it's the stigma, right? Oh, you drafted a guard at 6th, but like you're saying, Denzel Ward maybe. You said
I'm not
Roquan
taking
Smith
Sam
maybe.
Darnold over Quentin
Yeah,
Nelson. Like,
yeah.
yeah, like
Uh, Roquan Smith, I think would be up there, just because I think he's like a true difference maker. I like for a defense. We saw how the Ravens were able to upgrade once they got him, but so Roquan Smith, but yeah, he's been like a really good. Think he was an All Pro his second year. I'm not too sure on that, but he's been really good throughout his career, and like you said, it's the right pick. Sometimes you can't overthink things. You just got to get a good football player, and he'll fit your
yeah.
team. But obviously, like with the Andrew Luck stuff, we couldn't have predicted that. Just unfortunate injuries and things like that. But outside of Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson, quarterbacks of that class aren't looking too shabby, and they all went before those guys, except for Rosen went after Allen, I believe. But
Yeah.
other than that, yeah, Quentin Nelson's been super good. Ryan Kelly from Alabama, he's been their center for coming on 8 years now. Super good there. And then you mentioned Will Fries. They did draft Tanner. I think it's Bordolini is how you say it. From Wisconsin, I think
Bordelini.
he might step up there at some point. But Braden Smith has also played well the past 2 years at right tackle. So I like this group a lot. Like I said, fourth for me. I just like the depth more a bit with the Browns. And I don't think anybody can argue like Philly and Detroit being below anybody else in the league. So I think from here we're both in a good spot with our lists.
Yeah. I do a little bit of a change up at 4, and they are outside of your top 5, but I have the Baltimore Ravens, and they obviously lose Morgan Moses. They lose Kevin Zeitler, who goes to Detroit, and they don't have, like, it feels like portions of their offensive line that they had last year when they were the dominant team they were. They still have Ronnie Stanley at left tackle. You're looking at Tyler Linderbaum at center. They drafted their future right guard in Roger Rosengarten, who I think is a decent prospect. We'll see what he looks like his first year. Ben Cleveland, I think, is a solid right guard. And then you're really left with just questions with Andrew Voorhees, who was a 7th round pick last year, who's going to kind of be filling in for that Kevin Zeitler role. So you just wonder if, okay, do these younger guys replace what you had last year? And maybe they thought Kevin Zeitler lost a step. Maybe they liked kind of the young depth pieces they had. And this is a team that has dealt with so many injuries on their offensive line over the past several years, especially when Lamar Jackson's gone down. And it doesn't seem like they lose a step. They have a sense and a know-how with their offensive line coach and the offensive coordinator, whether it's been Greg Roman. Todd Monken didn't have to deal with a lot of injuries, but just putting those guys in the best situation to succeed. And it seems to work out for them. So that's why I have them here. Ravens always seem to kind of produce at that offensive line.
Yeah, they made my list. I'm just not as high on them as you are. I think from here on out, and I think Philly, Detroit, Indy, we're pretty sold on the starting group, or if not the starting group, maybe 4 out of the 5. I'm sold on the Browns as well. But from here on out, it's kind of nitpicky going down the list for me. And I do have the Ravens on my list. I said that, but at 5, I have the Los Angeles Chargers. A really young O line, mostly across the board, other than Bradley Bozeman, who they brought in from Carolina this year to replace Corey Lensley. But Rashawn Slater, left tackle, 1st round pick in 21. Zion Johnson, left guard, 1st round pick in 22. Bozeman, Jamari Sawyer was a 6th round pick in 22 from Georgia, but he filled in for Zion Johnson and I believe Slater for a game his rookie year. He's been a really good backup, but he's also a good starter. And then at they picked 5 this year, right? At pick 5, they got Joe Alt, who was my 3rd best player in the class, I believe. Super strong, 6'9", right left tackle. I think he'll transition seamlessly to the right side. And I think what who's Hortz, Joe Hortz, their new
Yep.
GM. I think him shoring up the O line this year to protect Herbert in the long haul is the correct move. And with all these high round, 1st round picks being Slater Johnson and Alt now along their O line, I think this O line is going to be good for years to come. And one of the reasons I had this group so high is because, yeah, they're young, but in like a 2 year span, which is our sample size, if Joe Alt hits, you're going to have a super young and super strong O line, kind of like what the Lions did like 2 years ago when they are going on 4 years now when they took Penei Sewell and started building that O line up strong. I think we're going to see that with the Chargers, and I think it's going to pay off in the long run when Herbert's healthy, when he finally has a receiver 1 to throw to pair with McConkey, and if Quentin Johnston's still on the team at that point to pair with them too. But I really like what they did there, and for that reason, they are, I think, number 5 for me. Yes, number
Yeah,
5.
they're number 5. So my number 5 team were the Browns. We already kind of talked about them, but my number 6 team are the Chargers. So just slot below where you have them, and it's to every point that you just said. The young pieces they have on that offensive line, if they stay healthy, could honestly be. And I know I have them at 6, but like when we talk about these top 3 offensive line units, like next year, I think they might have a
Mm-hmm.
conversation to be there because, like you're saying, Slater's already up there in terms of just like when he's healthy. He obviously had that torn bicep a couple years ago, but him and Joe Alt, I mean, those are two guys you aren't getting around. And then the fact that you have a Zion Johnson, you brought in a veteran in Broadley Bozeman, you have guys that played over the past couple of years that will probably be able to fill in some of those guard spots. You're going to be able to dictate that line of scrimmage and be able to run the ball, throw the ball, do different things while protecting your franchise quarterback in Justin Herbert. So again, I think this is a great group. The biggest thing is because they're so young, we don't know what we have with them. So it's one of those things. If Cam Jorgens hits and you have a guy like Zion Johnson fall off and whatnot, that's where it's like you might have the Eagles above the Chargers, you might have the
Mhm.
Chargers above the Eagles. It's all about how some of these young guys are going to respond now that they're in that starting role.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think in a couple years or next year, even they could be like the top tackle duo if they both show out. We got to remember Rashawn Slater, I believe, was an All Pro his rookie year. I think
Yeah,
second team. So
I think
like
it was second
he
team. I don't know if it
he
was first
already
team, but yeah, he
he
was.
already arrived, right? He just dealt with a little bit of injury. And if Joe Alt is as good as a lot of people, including myself, think he is, they're going to be really nasty for years to come. So
Well,
that
when
was
we're talking
five for
about
me.
guys like Quentin Nelson and whatnot, like he was one of the, I think Joe
Yeah,
Alt is kind of one of those guys coming out where it's like, no, he's a bona fide tackle. Like this is a guy that as long as he stays healthy is like almost on that Hall of Fame trajectory.
Notre Dame guy too. Both of those guys, they know how to
And
produce
yes,
some O line.
Slater was all pro
Northwestern,
second team.
yeah. And you talked about Zach Martin. He was Notre Dame too, if I recall correctly.
Yeah.
They know how to pump out some O linemen. But another young group, and this is number 6 for me now, is the Minnesota Vikings. I think they're a really slept on O line. Obviously, Christian Darrisaw, he was picked after Slater or Sewell and Slater in that draft. Quite a few picks later, actually, but he's really come onto his own. They just re signed Dalton Reisner, who they got from Denver a year ago. He filled in pretty well for them this year. Garrett Bradbury, he was a first round pick in 2019. Did not have a great start to his career from NC State, the center, but I think really has bounced back the last 2 years. Ed Ingram from LSU was good right guard. And I think the most underrated O lineman in the entire NFL, Brian O'Neill, their right tackle, very, very good player. I think they're like solid across all 5 positions. It just becomes a matter of depth at that point. But their starting 5 to me is one of the best in the league. I think McCarthy's walking into a really good position with the O line and now with Jefferson under an extension.
Yeah, no. At number 6, I completely understand. You had the Vikings there. They're homegrown guys. A lot to love there. I have them just outside my top 10. I think they're an honorable mention. I think there's a lot to love when it's high draft picks, but there's usually this like high expectation. They haven't done things to blow me away. It seems like they're in a good situation, being in Kevin O'Connell's situation, air raid, where they have wide receivers on the outside that are forcing defenses to drop more guys in the coverage, and that puts less strain on them. So I think if you don't have a guy like Justin Jefferson there, even TJ Hawkinson or Jordan Addison, I think we would have a lot more questions on this offensive line. I think they're blessed with the fact that they get to play with some of those playmakers on the outside that makes their life a little bit easier. So nothing against them. I think they're a great offensive line. I think they're definitely above average. The team that I have, because I talked about the Chargers being at my number 6, at number 7, I have a little bit older, not terribly old. They have some nice younger pieces, but it's the Los Angeles Rams. And at left tackle, they have Joe Noteboom. I don't think he is the slotted starter right now. I think he's dealing with a couple injuries. You have Jonah Jackson as the left guard. I think he came from Detroit a year or two back. They drafted Steve Avila. They brought in Kevin Dotson from Pittsburgh. So that interior offensive line kind of built through free agency in the draft. Really love that. Rob Havenstein, when he's been healthy, is a solid right tackle. And when that offensive line is healthy for Sean McVay, it seems like they can almost operate and do whatever they want, especially with Matthew Stafford under center. So, with their starting 5, if they stay healthy, they're going to be competing in the NFC. They're going to be a playoff contender. That is part of the reason why they're there, is because of what those front guys do. And that's so much of what we've already talked about with these other teams. This investment in the offensive line is what's going to keep them competitive in games, because it allows you to do so many different things. These guys are able to be hog mollies in the run game and get up to the second level and really just burn a defense out as the game goes on. And then they're also able to drop back and protect their quarterback when they need to get a bucket, so to speak. So that's why we talk about some of these guys. I don't know if you have the Rams in your top 10, but again, I think if these guys are healthy, they're one of the best groups in the league.
No, they did fall into my honorable mentions kind of group there. There's like five or six honorable mentions for me. Kind of like our last 2 weeks. Once I got to like past number 8, it was really hard for me to find the last two that I wanted. So they're definitely in consideration there. I like how this team fits together. How the offensive line fits together, and they do have some youth with a Villa there, but they also have some older guys there. And what I've found going through, like I have our lads pulled up each time we do one, and like my last 3 or 4, I really prioritize youth and the like proven youth in these things because I think going forward, I'd obviously rather have the younger guy if they're both good players. And for that reason, I know Havenstein's up there. I know Noteboom's not on the young side, and for me, they just fell kind of flat. We're at number 7, right? Yeah, number 7. For me, I have the Green Bay Packers, and we talked about this before the show, and they actually have a lot of good young players, and you don't really think about it when you think of the Packers because you're like, oh wow, Jordan Love had an excellent year. All their young first and second year receivers really cooked last year, but all their offensive linemen are pretty young too. Obviously, drafted Jordan Morgan this year, left tackle. I think they traded up for him. Elgton Jenkins, left guard. He's played like every position for them with Bakhtiari being hurt. He's played a little bit of center. Really good across the line. I think they've like settled on a spot for him at left guard. Zach Tom, originally a tackle at Wake Forest. I remember watching his tape that year. That was my first year. I was like watching tape and stuff. I thought he was an underrated player there. Josh Myers, he was the Ohio State center. He's right guard this year. Had a good, not rookie year, he had a good second year in 22, and he's really kept it up. And then Rasheed Walker, who was their 7th round pick out of Penn State, I believe. If you remember, Steve, when we were first watching tape, I was like, I think you said, why do you have this guy this high? And we pulled up the Michigan game, and it was when Aiden Hutchinson would rush against him. He just couldn't do anything against Rasheed. Rasheed Walker. I want to say Rasheed Wallace. It's Rasheed Walker, but he just couldn't do anything there. And I've always like been a fan of him since then, and it's cool to see him earn the starting spot now. I really like youth, like I said, along the O line. If they're able to like gel and be a cohesive unit, I want to take them going forward. I was a big fan of Jordan Morgan in this class. That could be or have inside outside versatility. Seems like he's going to be their left tackle. And if all else fails, they did sign Andre Dillard as well to be kind of a swing tackle. So there is marginal, what's the word, experienced depth. So I kind of like this O line moving forward. And if like if the wide receivers in Love are any indication of how like their young position groups can grow like really quickly, I think we might see this O line be one of the best in maybe this year or next year if they have the same trajectory as the receivers or Jordan Love did.
Yeah, you made a lot of great points, and the opening statement you kind of had of going like, okay, these proven guys who are getting a little bit older. This is obviously a 2-year window experiment we're doing. Is a reason why you were a little bit lower on the Rams and why you've been a little bit higher on teams like the Chargers and now the Packers. And while I had the Rams at 7, the team directly after, so this has now happened twice where you've had an offensive line and mine is just a notch below. And in this case, I have the Packers at number 8, and I love them for a lot of the reasons you said. They go out, they grab Jordan Morgan, who's arguably one of the better tackle prospects in this draft class. Andre Dillard, they're able to pick him up in free agency. He was a starting left tackle in Tennessee. That didn't work out, but I think that's a capable backup, a guy that you would want to come in if Morgan's not able to either start right away or he gets hurt. Their interior with Elton Jenkins, Zach Tom, Josh Myers. The Zach Tom arc is really fascinating because he did start in kind of like that right tackle position or kind of that tackle sphere, very much like Graham Barton. And we'll see Graham Barton kind of transition into like an interior offensive line role, probably the center role in Tampa. So really love kind of like that arc when you're doing a player comparison. I'm not saying they're the same player, more just going from that tackle to a dominant interior offensive lineman. And like you said, big fan of Rasheed Walker. Haven't watched much tape outside of that Aiden Hutchinson game where he was able to lock him down. But again, what some of these Shanahan coaches are able to do with their offensive linemen. I've had Sean McVay's offensive line now. We both have Matt LaFleur's in the top 10. we're very appreciative of what these guys are able to scheme up and do because of the front guys that they have. So just kudos to them. Their philosophy of going, okay, we're going to build inside out rather than outside in is a testament to just why they're so competitive.
Yeah, and you said the Packers were 8 for you at pick number 8, or not pick at number 8 for me. I have the a team you had much higher, the Baltimore Ravens. Uh, I love Ronnie Stanley. He's been able to play more recently than he did like the past two, not last year, but like 3 or 4 years before that. Seems like he was hurt every game, but he's been a bit more consistent lately. Tyler Linderbaum, fell in love with him watching that draft. He was one of my first round grades in that draft. Super good player. He's been an excellent fit for them there. They got Roger Rosengarten in the second round from Washington. I think he's going to be right tackle, according to our leads.
Yep.
I'm not sure that they also had Daniel Falale from a couple years ago, who's like Dawan Jones. He's like 6'8", 380 pounds. He's a massive guy. So I'm not sure who the starter there is going to be. I just have questions about the guards between Andrew Voorhees and Ben Cleveland. Obviously, they lose Zeitler to Detroit and Morgan Moses to it was the Jets, right? Yeah. And
Yep.
so there's been
I
a
think
bit
that
of
was a trade
turnover.
too.
Yeah, yeah, it was. That was a weird one because I
Yeah.
thought the Ravens kind of needed O line help, but regardless, I think there's been some turnover, and with every team that's come before this, it's either been like pretty consistent or they're adding like an immediate upgrade rookie or an immediate upgrade player. Like Bradley Bozeman's an immediate upgrade to nobody there, and the Chargers because Corey Linsley's retiring, for example. So like I'm a little bit down on there, but I love what Stanley and Linderbaum are able to do, and if they're able to stay consistent, like you said, throughout the Lamar Jackson kind of era in Baltimore, there's been a ton of O line injuries, but they're able to like still perform, still get wins, and I think that's a testament to John Harbaugh and his staff. And if they're able to stay consistent, this is for sure going to be a top 10 O line. But just for me, like I said, other ones are younger and I think a bit more stable, and that's why I have them at number 8 and not in my top 5.
And that's completely fair. I'm basing a lot of my evaluation of what we've seen from this group, even despite injuries. And
Mhm.
I just have a lot of faith in kind of the Ravens brass. I think that they draft well, they evaluate talent well, they have a good system in place, and that works out well for them. So at number 9, I have my third AFC North offensive line because I really am a big fan of how the AFC North honestly builds their teams. And that starts in the trenches. I mean, one of my honorable mentions are the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think very highly of all 4 of these offensive lines. They went out in free agency last year. They got Kansas City's left tackle in Orlando Brown, who started his career with the Baltimore Ravens. So full circle in that comparison. Their interior leaves a lot to be desired. You have Cordell Volson, Ted Karras, Alex Kappa. A lot of people were losing their minds a couple off seasons ago when they added Ted Karras and Alex Kappa. Thought that would put them over the top. Really didn't. They're above average starters. They're really good players when healthy. And then at right tackle, they made a huge investment this offseason. They went out, they signed Trent Brown, who isn't like a guy that like jumps off the page. He's not like the Tyrone Smith signing, or like I would put him on like the Morgan Moses level that we've been talking about, maybe even a notch below that. But they drafted Amarius Mims, who is probably arguably one of the better tackle prospects if we're just looking at just what he's produced in the few
Like
games that
his
we've
trade,
seen him.
like he's
Exactly.
he's
The
a super
traits,
traits guy. Yeah.
yeah, and it's you don't have to rush to get them there. You have 2 guys that are built very similar to him that are veterans in this league that can kind of help him develop his game. And so in my opinion, when I'm looking at this offensive line, you talk about youth, I'm seeing Orlando Brown, I'm seeing Marius Mims. If they're able to draft a couple interior offensive linemen over the next couple of years, and their general manager is really good about doing that. Why am I blanking out on his name? It's like the
Is it Duke Tobin? Is that
it's
the
Duke
Bengals?
Tobin, but
Yeah.
it's Brown. Like it's so weird. The ownership GM relationship there is really weird. So Duke Tobin, I think, does all the draft picks, but the owner is more involved with kind of how the contracts break down because he's a cheaper owner. It's a weird split divide that you have in Cincinnati, but I like where they're projecting to. They understand that hey, protecting Joe Burrow, making sure that we keep a couple of his guys. They've been drafting wide receivers a lot lately, so maybe they don't have to pay a T Higgins. I'm loving the direction this team's heading, and I really like how they're building almost like twin towers. That was the joke here in Carolina with Kelvin Benjamin and Devin Funches. But I really think that with their two tackles, that they just have two walls that are going to be really hard to get by.
Yeah, and you said it. I think Trent Brown is kind of the perfect guy for Amarius Mims to learn under. Obviously, both super massive humans. I think Trent Brown is 6'8", a little over 340. Amarius Mims is right up there too. And so I think learning from that, we talked about Amarius Mims in our pre-draft stuff, and I'm sure you heard it from all the other kind of draft people that he's raw, he's inexperienced, he's only started 8 games, he's only played in like 11 games. So like not a lot of snaps there, but if you don't have to play him and he can learn from Orlando Brown, Trent Brown, I think that's a really good spot for him. We've praised the Bengals going on back to when we started the pod, how they draft ahead or draft a year early. Amarius Mims, I think, was the perfect example of that, and I think it's going to benefit them in the future. I just have questions about their interior. I'm not super sold on was it Alex Kappa, Ted Karras, Cordell Volson. There's not my cup of tea. I think people made a big deal out of those signings a couple of years ago because we were coming off of the Burrow ACL, right, his rookie year, and so they're bringing in a bunch of O linemen. Even the year after that, the year after their Super Bowl appearance, they signed Lael Collins, I believe, or maybe that was the year after that. And it was the whole thing. I'm your new bodyguard. I'm not going to let you get touched. And it was right after Nick Bosa like picked. It was because he was on the Cowboys and the Niners had just beat them in the playoffs. It was right after and like Nick Bosa picked him up and threw him back. But sometimes their stuff doesn't work out and they know when to cut ties there. But I think for the future, they have both of their guys on the outside. They just got to figure out the interior. For me at pick or not pick, geez, at number 9, I have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and we talked about with Green Bay how they shuffled around Zach Tom and Elgton Jenkins. They shuffled like everybody on that O line last year. We had Tristan Wirfs, who was I believe a Pro Bowl right tackle, moved to the left side. We had questions about whether or not he would be be good on the left side. He was good on the left side last year. He put
Oh
those
yeah,
questions to bed. Cody Mock, who they drafted, he was a tackle at North Dakota State. Played guard. It's Godecki, right? Or Godecki?
Skodicki or Gadecki,
I
I've heard a lot, but I
Godecki.
don't
I'll
know.
just yeah. So Luke Godecki, his rookie year played in the interior. He was horrible, but last year moving to right tackle, I think he really found his spot there. You talked about Graham Barton being the kind of tackle to center arc. He played everywhere at Duke, so I have no concerns about him being a center in the NFL. And then they get Ben Bredesen, who was on the Giants O line as their left tackle, but they also drafted like 3 other O linemen this year, or not drafted, but added 3 more rookie O linemen. So they have the depth there. They have Rob Hainsey as well, still there at center. If Graham Barton needs to move to one of the guard spots, so really like what they're able to do from a pass protection perspective. The reason they're not a bit higher because young team, proven success, but they are not the best at run blocking or being maulers. We'll say. I think they're a lot more technical and pass blocking. We'll say savants rather than just straight up maulers, and that's what's kind of keeping them from being closer to that 5. Not, I wouldn't say I'd put them in my top 5, but closer to 5 than closer to 10.
So you bring up an interesting point. I love the fact that you brought up that they are a good group in pass protection, but they suck in the run game. They were one of the worst units last year. And I think one of the strongest indicators, and it's been proven in studies before, I believe mainly from PFF, that offensive line performance in the run game impacts the actual game outcome more and like team success more than offensive line success in the pass game. And I think a large part of that is because sacks are a quarterback stat. So even if a quarterback is pressured, if they're able to throw the ball away, find their check down, a lot of times they mitigate the negative plays that come from the pass play. Running backs depend on those lanes and holes being open. They can break a tackle or two, but if they have like 3 or 4 guys on them, the guy's coming down. Like that's just how it is. Guys corral to the ball carrier. It happens play in and play out. And that's what we saw time and time again last year in the run game. And so them not being able to open holes, especially in an offense that ran a lot of runs with in between the tackles, it worries me, especially when their left guard situation is on all hammed out. I think Cody Mock is still coming into his own. And if he regresses this year from where he was last year, then a lot of it falls on Graham Barton's shoulders. there is a lot to love with that youth. And if they project well, if Cody Mock takes a step, Graham Barton is just as dominant as he was in college, and he's the prospect we think he is, maybe that changes and everything gels together, and this is a top 10 unit. That's my biggest concern, is that the offensive line has more of an impact in that run game and opening lanes, and they sucked at that last year.
And yeah, and like I said, I think I mentioned it with the Ravens. Like 9 and 10 for me, it was like a pool of 6, 7, 8 different teams that I think I could have put in there. And for me, I just you have the two tackle guys. You assume you have those solved, right? And Wirfs and Gadecki. You drop in a guy like Barton who can play anywhere along the interior. I'm relatively high on that, especially if Cody Mock can like continue to have an upward projection there. And so that's why I have them at 9. And then at 10, we actually both have an NFC South team. And it's not the Buccaneers and it is not the Saints. But I have one team, you have the other. I think I'm going to go first because alphabetically, Atlanta comes before Carolina. I am just not as sold on
It
Carolina
does.
as you are. I don't want to be like a doomer or anything, but like I think Atlanta's O line is much better. I think we had questions going into last year how they would play, and I thought they performed very well. Jake Matthews is another tackle that's getting up there in age. He was drafted in 14 with Joel Batonio, but then you add Matthew Bergeron, who had a decent rookie year, I'd say. Drew Dalman was pretty good at center last year, and then Chris Lindstrom and Caleb McGarry might be the strongest like right guard, right tackle duo in our league. Uh, it's up there, I think, in my opinion. And I just think that in this group, and like I want to go through my honorable mentions, like who I compared this to. Kansas City, I thought had a really good interior, but questions at the tackle, so didn't do them. Pittsburgh, I like what Pittsburgh's done, but a lot of rookies on their O line too, so I didn't have them. Had the Rams as well, but like I said, a little bit older on that side. I had Houston as well, but Houston had a ton of O line injuries last year. We don't know what Juice Scruggs is capable of at center yet, and so I didn't have them. And then I thought Arizona was a sneaky one as well with Paris Johnson at left tackle. They signed Jonah Jackson from Cincy to be the right tackle, and Froholt was a decent center. But I think all those guys kind of fall short to the Falcons, who I think their O line unit has played together. Other than Bergeron, I think their O line units played together for longer. I thought they've been more successful in like just being stout and up front in both the run and pass game. We saw what Algier was able to do his rookie year. We saw what whenever he was given carries, we saw what Bijan Robinson was able to do. Arthur Smith, I hope you're watching this, but we saw what happened there. And then guys like Drake London and Kyle Pitts, they get open. There's time to throw. It's just Ritter couldn't hit him. So I think
Yeah.
the unit is strong. It's just the bad quarterback play and the all the we'll say hijinks, the Arthur Smith hijinks, kind of overshadowed that and cast a negative light on the offense. But I think with Kirk Cousins, if he's healthy, I think Michael Penix even can operate at a higher level than Ritter can. I think the O line's going to look a lot better when the quarterback actually gets the ball to the weapons. But we'll have to see if the quarterbacks are able to do that this year.
Yeah, and we'll have to see that. I'm not as sold on the Falcons offensive line. Not a big Drew Dahlman fan as kind of their center. I think there's a lot of hype because Jake Matthews, Chris Lindstrom, Caleb McGarry, they were all first round picks. That there's a little bit more credence to their name. It's shown up in contracts when they've been extended, and like don't get me wrong, they're good players. I just don't think like together they form like this just dominant unit. I feel like regardless of all the misses that we saw last year in that offense, whether it was Taylor Heineke or like you said, Ritter, Desmond Shitter. I was gonna say Shitter. I was like, I
Yeah.
know that's not his name,
Mitter,
but that's
shitter. Yeah.
yeah, it's been the running joke, but it's one of those things that even though he had time and wasn't delivering, it wasn't like we saw these massive holes being opened. I saw a couple plays where there were some great lanes opened up, but you can find a couple plays for a lot of offensive lines or a lot of different run blocking schemes. I mean, go watch the 49ers and the Dolphins from last year. They knew how to kick out and do some of these outside inside zone runs that just opened a hole. So and those aren't good offensive lines with the 49ers and Dolphins. So that's my biggest hesitation with them. My team that comes in, and it's because of the investment from a free agency standpoint, from a draft capital standpoint. I really like how the offensive line is coming together. I mean, you have Ike Ekwonu and Taylor Moton, two guys that the Carolina Panthers drafted. Ike obviously had a down year, but with some of the comments Dave Canales has made, what we saw with Tristan Wirfs and Luke Goedeke last year, that gives me hope that the tackle position, as long as those two guys stay healthy, are going to be really good, especially with how committed Dave Canales is going to be to the run game and knowing that offensive line performance is more predicated on that, like what we talked about just a little bit ago. And so when I look at the interior, all three of these guys have been signed by the Panthers in free agency. Austin Corbett came from the Rams a couple of years ago. This past offseason, we signed Damian Lewis and Robert Hunt. We have guys that we've drafted that I wouldn't say necessarily have proven their worth, and guys like Cade Mays and Chandler Zavala, but having Brady Christensen as a depth piece on the interior offensive line, like that gets me a little bit giddy. And then the fact that we have Josh Nijman as a backup tackle, it's just a lot to love about the depth pieces. You look at the investment actually made, I feel a lot more confident about the Panthers offensive line going into the season than the Falcons. And that's not to say that I don't think the Falcons should be like the NFC South favorite. They have a lot of weapons. They have Kirk Cousins as the quarterback. This is a good offensive line. To me, I think if we're putting it in a vacuum, the Panthers offensive line is a better than the Falcons. So you have two NFC South teams running out your top 10. I have the Panthers making it. Part of my honorable mentions, I have the Saints as well. I really like some of the pieces they have there. Obviously, Ryan Ramczyk is going to be out this year. So Trevor Penning and then Fuago, who they just drafted this past year out of Oregon State, are probably going to be your two tackles. I like some of the interior pieces they have. A lot to like there with Cesar Ruiz and some of the other guys. Um, Moving on, Kansas City, they've been known to put good offensive pieces around Patrick Mahomes. I'm a little concerned about the tackle position. That's why they're outside the top 10 for me. I like how the Buffalo Bills have built the offensive line around Josh Allen. Again, teams that are winning football games are making sure that they're putting their quarterbacks in the best position to succeed. Love that. Already mentioned earlier in this podcast, Minnesota and Pittsburgh kind of being honorable mentions for me. Is there anything you really want to touch on before we kind of cruise into perfect takes?
Yeah, just with the Panthers, and I agree that Christensen and Josh Nijman are really good depth pieces. They just got to show me, man. You saw what happened last year. Listen, Taylor Moton and Icky were healthy last year. I don't think either of them missed a game. It was just that interior, and it was like obviously with all the investment and stuff. I hope it goes better, but they just have to show me. It like Moton doesn't, but Icky has to take a step. I think in order for honestly for this offense to succeed. I think he is a key piece. And if we're getting free rushers into the backfield in under a second again, Bryce isn't going to be able to take the step. So
Again, those icky plays you're talking about, we're talking about a couple that happened throughout the year, and there were definitely mental lapses in his game. He's come out and even talked about it this offseason. My biggest thing is that a lot of the pressure that impacts, especially a shorter quarterback like Bryce Young or even a Drew Brees, is that interior
just up the
offensive
middle.
line.
Yeah.
And there was so much coming up there. And we had backups out there. We had first and second year dudes. We didn't have the guys that we had made the investment in, and Brady Christensen and Austin Corbett. Had those guys been out there, I think we see it like obviously, I don't think we were a good football team last year. And I talked about how our wide receiving group going in the last year sucked. But I think the offensive line, had it stayed healthy last year, would have given us 4 or 5 wins on the year rather than two.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Like Bryce had 62 sacks and
Yeah.
probably actually I recall a tweet from PFF. The most pressures I believe they ever charted for a rookie QB. So obviously, really horrible O line situation. I agree that up the middle is probably more important for a shorter quarterback. Bryce Young is actually like an effective scrambler. I think we saw that a lot last year. So like pressure from the side isn't necessarily as important as up the middle. My thing is those guys that we had in there, the backups and stuff, they weren't top six picks. Is my thing. Ike
Yep.
Ekwonu was the sixth overall pick. So that's my thing. We need to see that kind of growth from him. But I'm with you there. I'm optimistic about the Panthers, but they have to show me. Like if we come out, who do we play week one? It's man, I'm so not excited about the Panthers at this point that I don't even remember who we play week one. But I know it's on the road, and if we come out
It's
flat and
New Orleans. We play the Saints.
yes, you're right. And if we come out flat, and Bryce gets sacked like twice in the first quarter, like I'll be like, all right, I'm just gonna mail it in on the season. But hopefully we do a lot better. I talked about my honorable mentions, like we said, Kansas City, really strong interior. Pittsburgh, I like what they're doing, but again, they're young. They got to show it. And a lot of the other teams you mentioned there. So if we're going into the perfect take section, I said it when we started the O line stuff. The Lions tackle duo is the best tackle in the league. And I think it's going to be that way for the next year or so. But I talked about was it the Chargers? If Rashawn Slater and Joe Walt can live up to their potential, they're going to be right up there. But to me, the Lions have that crown right now, and it's a big part of why they are the number one offensive line unit for me for the next 2 years.
Can't disagree with that too much. I think the Lions' offensive tackle duo is one of the best in the league. I personally think Mailata and Lane Johnson are better. That's just a personal preference. I do have ties to the Philadelphia Eagles, so a little bit of love there for them. But my perfect take is going to be more homegrown in a sense. And I think the Carolina Panthers will have the best offensive line in the NFC South. You mentioned Tampa Bay,
I hope so.
I know we are both fingers crossed hoping. I'm not sold on the 1 year wonder Tampa Bay was last year. I think the Atlanta Falcons offensive line gets a little bit more hype just because they've drafted a couple guys with some good pedigree, and that was kind of the argument I had for Icky and Taylor Moton. So I'm a little susceptible to that with this pitch, but I think the Panthers are the better offensive line. There are just too many holes or too many questions on the other offensive lines, and I think that's going to propel us to be at least competitive. Whether or not we're actually competing for the NFC South, but I think we're going to be giving our best shot to some of these NFC South teams when we're playing the division games. So really excited about that. And we'll catch you guys next week. Find us on Purrfect_Takes on Twitter. You can watch us on YouTube, listen to us on Spotify and Apple. Definitely give us a follow, like, subscribe. Would love all the support, and we'll catch you guys next week.